Hey folks, C.W. Johnson Jr. here, and as you can see from my participation trophy, I voted today because today is election day in Louisiana, November 16th, 2019, and it is very cold. Rest in peace, fall. Let me take this thing off. Ah! Actually, didn't have that much. Um, I want to give you an update on what's been going on. I've been having some trouble with Adobe Premiere Elements. I cannot get my video editor to open. I have been in contact with support. They've been working on it, but unfortunately, I was in West Memphis for my work this past week, and unfortunately, the hotel I was in had terrible internet, and it kept timing out, messing up the process that the web support was going through to try to help uh, fix the problem. So I apologize that I haven't got any more videos up about That Should Be a Movie uh, in the past few months because I've been having trouble with that. And plus, my PTSD medication makes me a little drowsy, that makes me sluggish, and I'm not as energetic as I used to be. And of course, I'm not as uh, irritable and uh, pissy as I used to be too, and that's a good thing. But and just remember, PTSD does not make people violent. We're not ticking time bombs about to explode. We're just hurt, lonely people who are withdrawal. So that's why I haven't got any movies up yet. So yeah, technical problems and just plain laziness. I wish I could tell you what I've been listening to, but I haven't really been listening to any books on tape recently because I have a trial for Sirius XM radio on my new vehicle. So I've been listening to a lot of bluegrass, Willie's Roadhouse, classic country, outlaw country, and Saints games. Unfortunately, that last game wasn't that great. So I can't hold up a book on tape to show you what I've been listening to. But I can tell you what I've been reading. This is the New Masters, Northern Planters During the Civil War Reconstruction by Lawrence P. Powell from, I thought I had it right down, Yale University Press. Very fascinating book about a subject that gets overlooked a lot. That is Northerners who came south during the war and after Reconstruction to buy up all the abandoned plantations or plantations that had um, sunk financially. Having the plantation owners were ruined financially, and they had to sell them. So a very fascinating look at this very nuanced and ambiguous part of the war. Even so is how some of these planters eventually became Southern sentiment as well. Very, very interesting story in here about a Southern planter. The Northern planters became Southern sentiment. Of course, a lot of because of the crop failures of 1866 and 1867, a lot of them eventually moved back north. Interesting story in here about a Southern planter in the Vicksburg area. He'd been in the Texas area as a refugee. He came back to the Vicksburg area, found that his plantation was being run by Yankees, and he got guerrillas in the area who were made up of both deserters from the Confederate and Union Army to help him run them out. So that ought to be a movie. And one thing that disappoints me is he has a quote from a Union general who talks about how the freed slaves were running amok and wreaking havoc and causing criminal activity. And he said if he knew that was going to happen, he would not have fought on the Union side. But unfortunately, it doesn't give the Union officer's name. And I feel like if you're going to say that, or a Union general, I believe it was. If you're going to say a Union general said that, you should probably give the Union general's name. But unfortunately, he doesn't say that, so that's my only complaint about the book. I've also been reading The Triumph at Impala Kaminia, How the Indian Army Finally Stopped the Japanese Juggernaut by Raymond Callahan. Overlooked part of World War II. I've been planning to make a movie about episode of That Should Be a Movie about this, about how Indian soldiers stopped the Japanese from advancing westward into Asia, and it was basically a siege warfare and very last stand kind of situation, and very fascinating. I believe the History Guy has a video about it, so be sure to go over and check out his video about it. Uh, then I've been reading this Union officers memoirs of being in Louisiana during the Civil War. Among the Cotton Thieves by Edward Bacon. Uh, he does cover a lot of stuff in detail, and there's other stuff he doesn't really cover at all. Disappointing, mainly probably because of the politics involved with writing a book like this during that time. But it's a pretty good book for anybody who wants to look into the Port Hudson campaign and find out information about the American Civil War in the southern Louisiana. And how I found out about this book was this list of recommended reading from the Port Hudson State Historic Site. I have a list of books here and on the back, and some of these I've read, some of them I've not. A lot of them I can't find at the library, unfortunately. So, speaking of Louisiana history, I have been also reading about Bernardo de Galvez, Spanish hero in the American Civil War, American Revolution by I'm not even going to try to say that, butcher that guy's name, unfortunately. But it's a very fascinating book. I think half of this book is footnotes. I'll tell you that. It's thick. That's the main part. Footnotes. Appendices. But very fascinating look into Spanish colonialism and Louisiana's part in the American Revolution. Very overlooked part in the American Revolution about the battles that occurred down there at Baton Rouge, Lake Bourgeon. There's also Mobile, over into Florida where you had the Battle of Pensacola. So it's along the Gulf Coast, along the Gulf Coast. There was a lot going on during the American Revolution, mainly Spanish versus British. Definitely deserves to be a movie. I'm planning on doing an episode about this guy for that to be a movie. I want to read a few more books about him before I do it though, so I can have a variety of information. But so far, I'm at the point where Louisiana is deciding whether to take sides or not, and it's all dealing with smuggling and things like that. Interesting look at colonialism in New Mexico. An observation that Galvez made there was that the Creole people, the settlers who were not ruled over by the Spanish lords, were much more who were much more independent, were much better fighters than the regulated Spanish soldiers who served in the garrison, and that might have had an impact on why he decided to side with the American rebels during the War for Independence. Another book I'm reading is Planets with Poverty, The Suffering South, uh, Prosperity, the Poverty, and the Coming Struggle, or Continuing Struggle by James Ronald Kennedy and Walter Ronald Kennedy. Now, I'm what do you call it? It's complicated culture when it comes to the war between the states, and there's a lot with which I agree with the Kennedy brothers on. But unfortunately, this book was not the scholarly thesis I was looking for. There's a lot of repetition, and there's a lot of just stating uh, political statements and worldview statements, almost propagandic type reading, and not a lot of in-depth look at sources, first-hand sources that I wish there could have been. Like I agree that the poverty in the South, even to this day, has something to do with how the South was ravaged during the war, and we never had a good reconstruction Marshall Plan like Europe had. But there's a lot of kind of conspiracy talk in it, and there's like statements about like there's the grandma who said the Yankees tried to starve them after the war. They don't really explain how that occurred. One thing that story my dad's told me about people he's worked with at railroad stations, they talk about how the shipping rates for the South were much more higher than that for the North. And I wish he could have gone into something like that, explained how Northern Railroad tycoons wrecked the Southern railroads so they would be subversion to the suburban, you know what I'm trying to say, to Yankee railroad tycoons, and the Union, the Northern railroads would have more control over the prices and everything like that. So you could look into that. I'm sure there's a much more scholarly work dealing with the war's economic impact on the South, and how it contributed to sharecropping and poverty starvation and disease. So, but if you're looking for an introduction to reading about someone's view on the war between the states and Yankee imperialism, this one's for you. This one I feel like is probably going to have more information on the South being financed with poverty because of the war, sick from freedom, African American illness, and suffering during the Civil War and Reconstruction by Jim Downs. I just started it last night. I read a couple reviews about it, and it's casting shade on the triumphant. Oops, lost my marker. On the triumphist view, excuse me, of emancipation, showing how things were not that simple back then and more complicated. And just like in Iraq, when the Americans went in and did not pay attention to how the economy and culture and government was run there, and they just dismantled it overnight. There was poverty and war resulted because they did not pay attention to what the situation on the ground was. In the similar thing with emancipation in the American Civil War, the North didn't know how much infrastructure was built into this plantation system. That's how the slaves were fed, clothed, take care of the medicine, and basically all their livelihood was from that. Sort of like a communist country, a socialist country. And you destroy that overnight, and there's no way for these people to feed and get food, medicine, clothing, housing, and all that. So it shows how the Civil War is much more tragic and less romantic as people like to envision it. And since I've told you in the past about the Donald Fraser books and how they talk about the effect of the war on infrastructure and how the slaves were just thrown in poverty overnight. Well, this is going to be much more scholarly thesis on it. So that's what I've been reading. Let me get my bookmark back in there real quick. And another thing, go see Midway. I understand there's a lot of been talk about the cheesy lines, and the graphics are nowhere as much as I would like them to have been. But from my research, it's very historically correct. And if we want, and here's the conundrum, the situation, the crux. If you do not support historical dramas and period dramas and war films that come out because they're not perfect, they don't expect any more to come out, because that's how Hollywood works. They don't judge a film's failure on maybe its director or its cinematographer or its special effects. They judge it on the subject matter or the actor. They think, well, audiences don't want to go see that kind of subject matter. And I believe Midway is a movie that very sincerely wants to honor our veterans. And I want to see more movies out of Hollywood and independent movies as of course as well that honor our veterans and have a much better budget and much better special effects than Midway come out. So go see Midway. So more movies that honor our veterans will be greenlighted. This has been C.W. Johnson. Thank you for watching. God bless, and God bless America.